Sometimes the smallest mystery arrives with 4 trembling paws instead of a knock at the door. Rain swept across the empty streets of Ashford, Colorado, long after midnight, turning the quiet mountain town into a blur of silver reflections beneath flickering streetlights. The cold carried the scent of wet pine, damp earth, and distant chimney smoke drifting lazily through the narrow streets where most porch lights had already gone dark. Officer Nathan Walker eased his patrol cruiser along Maple Ridge Road, the windshield wipers moving in a slow, steady rhythm that seemed to echo the silence surrounding him. At 38 years old, Nathan had spent enough years wearing a uniform to recognize the difference between ordinary quiet and the uneasy kind that asked to be noticed. Before joining the police department, he had served as a United States Marine, and although the battlefield was now years behind him, experience had taught him that instincts often whispered long before evidence ever spoke. His shift had been uneventful, little more than checking locked storefronts, assisting a stranded driver earlier that evening, and making sure the icy roads remained clear after the first winter storm rolled through the county. As he rounded the final bend near the abandoned train depot on the edge of town, something unusual caught the corner of his eye. A tiny figure stood perfectly still beneath a flickering street lamp, almost hidden by the falling rain. Nathan slowed immediately. At first he thought it was someone's lost puppy wandering too far from home. But as the cruiser rolled closer, he realized something did not fit. The little German shepherd did not panic when the headlights illuminated the road. It did not bark. It did not run toward the vehicle or away from it. Instead, the puppy remained exactly where it stood, looking directly at the approaching cruiser with calm amber eyes far too steady for an animal so young. Nathan parked along the shoulder and stepped into the cold rain, pulling his jacket tighter as icy droplets tapped softly against the brim of his patrol cap. The puppy watched every movement without fear. Its sable coat was soaked, making its oversized paws appear even larger against the wet pavement. It could not have been more than 10 weeks old, yet its posture was strangely composed, almost disciplined, as though someone had carefully taught it to wait no matter how long it took. Nathan crouched several feet away, keeping his voice low and gentle. "Easy there, little one. You are all right." The puppy tilted its head slightly, but never broke eye contact. Then, with slow, deliberate steps, it walked toward him without hesitation. There was no frantic excitement, no nervous uncertainty, only quiet trust that seemed impossible between strangers meeting for the first time. Nathan reached out carefully, expecting the puppy to hesitate. Instead, the little shepherd calmly rested its damp nose against his gloved hand before sitting neatly beside his boot. It was then that Nathan noticed the worn strip of dark leather lying half-buried in a puddle only a few feet away. He picked it up slowly. It was not an ordinary collar. The leather had been cut cleanly, as though someone had removed it in great haste. There was no identification tag, no owner information, only a faint rectangular imprint where something metallic had once been attached. The puppy immediately looked toward the broken strap, then back at Nathan, letting out the softest whimper before lowering its head. A strange feeling settled quietly across Nathan's chest. This did not look like an accident. It looked like the beginning of a story someone desperately wanted erased. Cradling the shivering puppy inside his jacket, Nathan glanced once more at the empty road disappearing into the darkness beyond the old depot. Nothing moved. No headlights appeared. No footsteps echoed through the rain. Only the lonely whisper of wind drifted between abandoned railroad tracks as he carried the puppy back toward the cruiser, completely unaware that before sunrise, one routine veterinary examination would transform a simple rescue into a mystery that would bring law enforcement back to that forgotten road. The rain had not stopped by the time Nathan reached the only 24-hour veterinary clinic within 50 miles. A warm glow spilled through the windows onto the wet parking lot, where puddles reflected the pale yellow light like scattered pieces of glass. Inside, the familiar scent of antiseptic, fresh coffee, and clean linen replaced the cold mountain air. The waiting room was quiet except for the soft ticking of an old wall clock and the gentle hum of a space heater working against the winter chill. Nathan carried the small German shepherd inside his jacket, where the puppy had remained unusually calm throughout the drive, listening quietly to the steady rhythm of the patrol cruiser instead of whining or struggling. As soon as they entered Dr. Emily Harper looked up from her desk. She had served the community for nearly 20 years and had treated everything from injured hawks to retired ranch horses. Tall, composed, and kind-eyed, she immediately noticed the soaked bundle resting against Nathan's chest. "Well," she said with a gentle smile, "it looks like someone found the right officer tonight." Nathan carefully placed the puppy onto the padded examination table. The little shepherd stood without hesitation, shaking a few drops of rain from his sable coat before sitting neatly, watching every movement inside the room with remarkable focus. Emily smiled at first. "He is calmer than most puppies I have ever seen." Nathan nodded. "That is exactly what concerns me." The examination began routinely. Emily listened to the puppy's heartbeat, checked his temperature, examined his eyes, ears, teeth, and paws. Everything appeared surprisingly healthy considering he had been found alone during a winter storm. His coat was clean beneath the rainwater. His nails had been carefully trimmed only days earlier. Someone had clearly been caring for him. Then Emily reached beneath the thick fur along the left side of his neck, searching for a routine microchip. Her fingers suddenly paused. Her expression changed almost imperceptibly. She leaned closer, gently separating the fur while adjusting the examination light overhead. Nathan noticed the silence immediately. "What is it?" he asked. Emily did not answer. Instead, she reached for a magnifying lamp positioned beside the examination table. Beneath the puppy's soft coat rested a tiny healed mark unlike anything she expected to find on an animal this young. It was not an injury. It was not a standard identification tattoo. It looked deliberate, almost professionally placed, though far smaller than any veterinary marking she had encountered. Emily quietly retrieved a handheld scanner. The device passed slowly across the puppy's shoulders. Nothing appeared. She tried again from another angle. Still nothing. Frowning, she adjusted the scanner settings one final time. This time a brief electronic tone echoed softly through the room before the display flashed a string of characters unlike any standard pet registration number. Emily stared at the screen without speaking. Nathan stepped closer. "Does he have a microchip?" She slowly lowered the scanner. "Not exactly." Her voice had become noticeably quieter. "I have never seen a registration sequence formatted like this." The puppy remained perfectly still throughout the examination, watching Emily with calm amber eyes while resting one paw against the edge of the examination table as though waiting for instructions he already understood. Emily glanced once toward the clinic door before returning her attention to the screen. Then she walked silently to her office, closed the door halfway, and reached for the telephone mounted beside her desk. Nathan could hear only a few words through the partially open doorway. "This is Dr. Emily Harper. Yes. I need to report something unusual." "No, it cannot wait until morning." She paused, listening carefully before looking back toward the examination room, where Nathan stood beside the quiet puppy. When she returned a moment later, her face carried the calm professionalism Nathan expected from an experienced veterinarian, but her eyes held something entirely different. They held concern. "Officer Walker," she said softly, "I think this little dog may be connected to something much larger than a lost pet. The police are on their way." The clinic grew unusually quiet after Emily ended the call. Even the old wall clock seemed louder now, each gentle tick stretching the silence a little farther. Outside, rain continued tapping softly against the windows while the first pale hints of dawn began pushing through the heavy mountain clouds. Nathan remained beside the examination table, resting one hand lightly near the puppy without disturbing him. The little German shepherd had not moved. He sat calmly with remarkable patience, occasionally lifting his nose toward the sounds drifting through the building as though listening for something only he could recognize. Emily returned carrying a small tablet connected to the clinic's secure veterinary database. She carefully entered the identification sequence displayed by the scanner, expecting another error message. Instead, the screen froze for several long seconds before displaying a notice she had never encountered during her entire career. "Access restricted. Authorized agency verification required." Emily frowned. Every licensed veterinarian could access national pet registration records, agricultural databases, and working dog registries, but this system rejected her credentials entirely. Nathan noticed the concern returning to her face. "What does that mean?" he asked quietly. Emily slowly shook her head. It means this identification belongs to a database outside ordinary veterinary records. Before either of them could speak again, another vehicle entered the parking lot. Headlights swept briefly across the waiting room before fading. A few moments later, the front door opened, allowing another wave of cold winter air inside. Detective Laura Bennett stepped into the clinic carrying a weatherproof evidence case beneath one arm. She had worked investigations across the county for nearly 15 years and had earned a reputation for careful observation rather than quick conclusions. Tall, composed, and dressed in a plain dark overcoat over professional attire, she greeted Nathan with a brief nod before turning her attention toward the puppy. Emily quietly explained everything they had discovered, including the unusual scanner response. Laura listened without interrupting. When Emily finished, the detective approached the examination table slowly. The puppy watched her without fear, then calmly lowered his head as though satisfied she posed no threat. Laura crouched beside him, studying the healed mark beneath the fur. "That is not veterinary work," she said thoughtfully. "Someone placed this intentionally." She removed a compact forensic scanner from her case, a newer model used for specialized investigations involving evidence recovery and protected identification systems. The device emitted a soft blue light as it passed across the puppy's neck. Within seconds, another sequence appeared, longer this time, followed by a small encrypted emblem neither Nathan nor Emily recognized. Laura's expression changed immediately. She stepped away from the table and quietly photographed the display before contacting someone through her secure department radio. Her conversation lasted less than a minute, but Nathan noticed one sentence that stood apart from everything else. "Yes," she said carefully. "The identifier is genuine." She lowered the radio and looked back toward the puppy with renewed curiosity. "Officer Walker," she began, "about 8 years ago, a federal canine development program was permanently closed. Most records disappeared into restricted archives. I never expected to see one of their identifiers again." Nathan glanced toward the young shepherd, whose calm amber eyes followed every voice inside the room with quiet awareness beyond his age. "Are you saying someone trained him?" Laura nodded slowly. "Not him." She paused before continuing. "This identification was issued before he was even born. Somehow this puppy is connected to something that officially no longer exists." The room fell silent once again. The little German shepherd gently rested one paw upon the edge of the examination table and looked directly toward Nathan, as though waiting for him to understand that the answers everyone was searching for had never been hidden very far away. Morning finally arrived, but the questions inside the clinic only seemed to multiply with the daylight. Pale sunlight filtered through rain-covered windows, casting long reflections across the polished floor while the storm slowly retreated into the surrounding mountains. Detective Laura Bennett remained quietly focused on the encrypted identifier displayed on her scanner. Nathan stood beside the examination table, watching the little German shepherd explore the room with calm curiosity instead of nervous uncertainty. Most puppies would have chased every unfamiliar sound or hidden behind the nearest friendly face. This one simply observed everything with unusual patience, pausing occasionally to study each person as though carefully memorizing them. Emily noticed it as well. "He behaves like he has already been taught to assess a room before moving," she whispered. Nathan nodded slowly. "That is exactly what I was thinking." Laura closed the scanner and reached into her evidence case, removing a secure tablet connected to restricted investigative archives. After entering several authorization codes, she searched the identification sequence once more. The screen remained blank for several moments before one heavily redacted record finally appeared. Most of the information had been permanently sealed, leaving only a few visible details. Project status: inactive. Final archive date: 8 years earlier. Classification: protected working canine lineage. Nathan leaned closer without speaking. Laura quietly explained that years ago several experimental breeding and training programs had been consolidated into government agencies before eventually being discontinued. The dogs themselves had never done anything unusual or dangerous. They had simply descended from carefully documented working bloodlines selected for intelligence, health, and stable temperament. Every registered puppy had been assigned a protected identifier from birth, so their lineage could be traced if records were ever needed. "Then why would someone remove his collar?" Nathan asked. Laura looked toward the broken leather strap resting inside an evidence bag on the counter. Because someone wanted him to become impossible to identify. The room fell silent again. Ash wandered slowly across the examination table before stopping beside the evidence bag. He lowered his nose, sniffed once, then looked toward Nathan instead of the collar. It was almost as though he understood the object no longer belonged around his neck. Emily gently scratched beneath his chin while smiling faintly. "Whatever happened before last night," she said softly. "Someone spent time caring for him. His health is excellent. His coat is clean. His trust in people did not happen by accident." Nathan looked through the clinic window toward the empty road outside. The abandoned train depot where he had found the puppy suddenly felt far more important than it had only a few hours earlier. Laura seemed to reach the same conclusion. She gathered the evidence bag, secured her scanner, and closed the archive file. "The rain probably washed away most physical evidence," she admitted. "But we still need to examine that location in daylight." Nathan agreed immediately. As he reached to lift Ash from the examination table, the puppy suddenly paused. His ears lifted toward the front entrance before anyone else reacted. A second later, tires rolled quietly across the wet parking lot. Another vehicle had just arrived. Through the clinic window, Nathan saw an unfamiliar gray sport utility vehicle come to a stop without emergency lights or official markings. A man remained seated behind the steering wheel, watching the building without stepping outside. Nathan's instincts tightened immediately. Whoever had arrived was not here for routine veterinary care, and before the morning was over, they would discover that the mystery surrounding one small German Shepherd puppy had already begun drawing the attention of people who knew far more than they were willing to say. A few quiet moments passed before the driver finally stepped out of the gray sport utility vehicle. He closed the door without hurry and adjusted the collar of his dark waterproof coat against the lingering mountain breeze. From the clinic window, Nathan watched every movement with the calm attention that years in uniform had taught him to maintain. The stranger did not appear nervous. He did not seem lost. Instead, he looked directly toward the veterinary clinic as though he already knew exactly what he had come to find. Detective Laura Bennett noticed him at the same moment. Without saying a word, she slipped the evidence bag containing the broken leather collar back into her case before quietly positioning herself closer to the reception desk. Dr. Emily Harper greeted the visitor politely as the front door opened. The man introduced himself as Richard Hale, explaining that he represented a private canine research foundation. His voice was friendly, measured, and confident, carrying the polished manner of someone accustomed to formal conversations. He smiled warmly while asking whether anyone had recently brought in a young German Shepherd found near the old train depot. Nathan exchanged a brief glance with Laura. Neither of them answered immediately. Instead, Laura asked the obvious question. "How did you know where the puppy was found?" Hale's smile remained unchanged, though it seemed just slightly slower this time. He explained that one of their breeding records suggested a young working dog might have wandered away during transport after severe weather. According to him, the organization simply hoped to return the puppy safely. His explanation sounded reasonable, almost too reasonable. Emily quietly observed Ash from across the room. The little German Shepherd had remained relaxed throughout the morning, yet the moment Hale entered the clinic, the puppy stopped exploring. He neither barked nor hid. Instead, he sat perfectly still beside Nathan's boots, watching the visitor with calm, unwavering attention. Nathan gently rested a reassuring hand along the puppy's back. Ash responded by leaning lightly against his leg without taking his eyes off the stranger. It was not fear Nathan recognized. It was careful assessment. Laura requested identification. Hale immediately produced professional credentials bearing the name of the foundation he had mentioned. Everything appeared authentic. Even so, Laura excused herself briefly and stepped into the hallway to verify the documents through official channels. Nathan remained in the waiting room, making quiet conversation while studying Hale's behavior. The visitor occasionally glanced toward the examination room, but his eyes lingered longest on the evidence case resting beside Laura's chair. It was only a fraction of a second, yet Nathan noticed it. Marines learned early that people often looked first toward what mattered most to them. Several minutes later, Laura returned carrying her phone. Her expression remained composed, but Nathan recognized the subtle change in her eyes. She quietly asked Hale another question. When exactly did your organization report this puppy missing? Hale answered immediately, providing a date from the previous afternoon. Laura nodded politely before lowering her phone. That is interesting, she said calmly, because the foundation listed on your identification has been inactive for nearly 8 years. Silence settled across the room. Hale's smile faded almost imperceptibly. Outside, the clouds finally began to break apart as thin rays of morning sunlight reached the wet pavement. Inside, Ash slowly walked forward until he stood beside Nathan's boots once again, his small ears raised, his amber eyes fixed upon the man who had just run out of explanations. Richard Hale remained silent for several long seconds, his confident expression gradually giving way to quiet resignation. He looked from Detective Laura Bennett to Officer Nathan Walker before lowering his eyes toward the small German shepherd sitting calmly beside Nathan's boots. The puppy never barked. He simply watched with steady amber eyes, as though patiently waiting for the truth to catch up with everyone else. Laura spoke first. Who are you really? Hale exhaled slowly before removing a worn leather card holder from the inside pocket of his coat. This time the identification he presented belonged to a federal investigative support division assigned years earlier to oversee the closure of several specialized working canine programs. The credentials were authentic. I should have introduced myself honestly, he admitted quietly. But after the program was dissolved, every remaining record was sealed. We were instructed to keep public attention away from the bloodlines that remained. Nathan frowned. Then why remove the puppy's collar and leave him beside an abandoned train depot? Hale's shoulders lowered. Because someone wanted to protect him. The room fell silent again. Hale explained that shortly before the final breeding records were scheduled for permanent archival storage, an elderly caretaker responsible for several retired working dogs had passed away unexpectedly. During the following weeks, confusion over ownership, transfers, and legal responsibility left one final litter without proper placement. Rather than risk the puppies disappearing into unverified private sales, one caretaker quietly separated the healthiest male from the paperwork, removed every visible identifier, and hoped someone trustworthy would find him before the wrong people did. It had been a desperate decision, not a criminal one. Emily listened carefully before looking toward Ash. The little shepherd remained relaxed, gently wagging his tail once as Nathan rested a reassuring hand along his back. Laura folded her notebook closed. So there was never a hidden operation? Hale shook his head. Only forgotten records, misplaced responsibility, and people trying to protect animals they believed deserved better. Nathan looked down at the puppy. The mystery that had begun in the rain no longer felt frightening. It felt heartbreaking. Ash had never been carrying dangerous secrets. He had simply carried the last surviving thread connecting years of careful breeding, faithful service, and people who refused to let that legacy disappear. Emily smiled warmly. Then there is one question left. She turned toward Nathan. Does anyone have a legal claim to him? Hale answered before anyone else could speak. No. Every ownership record was voluntarily surrendered this morning. He is free to begin a new life. Nathan knelt beside the puppy, who immediately stepped forward and rested his small head against the officer's hand with complete trust. Outside, the rain had finally stopped. Sunlight broke through the clouds, illuminating the wet pavement where the storm had washed everything clean. Nathan smiled softly as he looked into the young German shepherd's bright eyes. Looks like you are coming home with me, little partner. Ash answered with a gentle wag of his tail before following Nathan toward the clinic door without hesitation. Some mysteries end with arrests. Others end with something far rarer. A forgotten promise finds the right person, a lonely puppy finds a family, and a life that almost vanished into silence begins again with hope. A week passed, and the quiet farmhouse on the edge of Ashford slowly began to feel different. The silence that had once greeted Nathan every evening was now filled with the soft rhythm of tiny paws crossing hardwood floors, the occasional playful rustle of a forgotten tennis ball, and the gentle sigh of a young German shepherd finally learning what safety sounded like. Every morning before sunrise, Nathan opened the front door and stepped onto the weathered wooden porch with a steaming mug of coffee while the first rays of light stretched across the snow-dusted fields. Ash was always beside him. The puppy would sit perfectly still, watching the awakening countryside with remarkable patience instead of chasing every bird or fluttering leaf. Nathan often smiled at the sight. Even now, with no commands being given, the little shepherd naturally chose to remain close, quietly observing the world as though every sunrise held another lesson worth learning. Their routine became simple. Nathan left for the police station each morning while Ash spent a few hours at Emily Harper's clinic, where everyone quickly fell in love with the unusually calm puppy. Emily insisted he needed socialization as much as veterinary care, and the small waiting room soon became his classroom. Children waiting with family pets found themselves greeted by a gentle wag instead of excited jumping. Elderly ranchers chuckled as the little German shepherd calmly sat beside their boots, accepting every kind word with quiet dignity. Emily watched carefully, amazed at how naturally Ash seemed to read human emotions. If someone appeared frightened, he approached slowly. If someone smiled, his tail answered before the rest of his body did. Nathan noticed the same gift each evening after work. The puppy somehow sensed whether the day had been difficult long before Nathan spoke a single word. On stressful nights, Ash simply rested beside the rocking chair near the fireplace, offering silent companionship that required no explanation. One Friday afternoon, Nathan received an unexpected visitor at the station. Detective Laura Bennett arrived carrying a neatly organized file folder and a small wooden presentation box. She explained that federal investigators had completed their review of the archived records. Everything Hale had described proved accurate. The remaining files would stay protected, but one decision had already been finalized. Ash's official ownership had been permanently transferred to Nathan Walker. Laura handed him the folder with a warm smile. Inside rested the adoption certificate, complete veterinary records, and a newly issued registration identifying Ash simply as a privately owned German Shepherd. No hidden codes remained. No restricted classifications. Only a healthy young dog beginning an ordinary life. Nathan thanked her quietly before opening the small wooden box. Resting inside was a polished brass nameplate no larger than a business card. It bore only a single inscription: "Legacy preserved." Nathan looked at the words for several moments before gently closing the lid. That evening he attached a brand new leather collar around Ash's neck. Unlike the old one found beside the abandoned train depot, this collar carried a simple stainless steel tag engraved with only 2 lines. "Ash, home." The puppy tilted his head curiously as Nathan fastened the buckle, then happily trotted across the yard before returning moments later with a weathered stick almost twice his size. Nathan laughed, perhaps louder than he had in months. It was the kind of laughter that comes only after long seasons of responsibility finally make room for peace. As the sun disappeared beyond the distant mountains, Nathan tossed the stick once more across the golden field. Ash sprinted after it with all the joyful energy of a puppy no longer carrying the weight of unanswered questions. Watching him race through the tall grass, Nathan realized that the greatest gift they had uncovered had never been hidden inside sealed archives or forgotten records. It was the chance for a life once surrounded by mystery to grow into something beautifully ordinary, where trust replaced uncertainty, kindness outlasted fear, and every new day began not with secrets, but with family. A month slipped quietly into another, and with every passing sunrise the little farmhouse felt less like a place where Ash had been rescued and more like the home he had always been meant to find. Spring settled gently across the Colorado hills, covering the pastures with fresh green grass and filling the crisp morning air with the scent of wildflowers, pine trees, and damp earth after light afternoon showers. Ash had grown quickly. His oversized paws had begun matching the rest of his strong young frame, and the soft puppy coat was slowly giving way to the rich sable colors of a confident German Shepherd. Yet one thing never changed. Every morning before Nathan left for work, Ash sat patiently beside the front door without a single command, waiting until Nathan finished tying his boots. Only then would he quietly walk beside him toward the pickup truck, his tail moving with calm happiness rather than restless excitement. Nathan often laughed to himself. Some habits, he thought, were simply written into a dog's heart. At the police station, Ash became a familiar visitor. Although he was never treated as an official working dog, officers welcomed him with smiles, and dispatchers often kept a small container of training treats beside the front desk. The puppy accepted every greeting politely before returning to Nathan's side, as though he had already decided exactly where he belonged. One afternoon, while Nathan completed paperwork, Ash wandered into the community meeting room where several elementary school children were touring the station with their teacher. The children immediately noticed the young German shepherd sitting quietly near the doorway. Instead of rushing toward them, Ash remained seated until Nathan nodded gently. Only then did the puppy walk forward with careful, measured steps, allowing each child to pet him one at a time. Emily Harper, who had stopped by the station to deliver updated vaccination records, smiled warmly as she watched the scene unfold. "He understands people better than many adults," she whispered. Nathan looked at Ash, who patiently rested his head beneath the gentle hand of a nervous little boy standing slightly apart from the others. Within moments the child was smiling. Nathan quietly replied, "Maybe kindness is easier to recognize when you have never forgotten how much it matters." Later that evening they returned home beneath a sky painted with shades of orange and soft blue. Nathan carried the small wooden presentation box Laura had given him weeks earlier and placed it carefully on the living room bookshelf beside a framed photograph of Ash playing in the backyard. The brass plate inside remained untouched, no longer a symbol of hidden archives or forgotten programs, but a quiet reminder that some legacies survive not because they are protected by locked files, but because someone chooses to care. Ash stretched comfortably across the rug near the stone fireplace, chewing thoughtfully on a favorite toy before lifting his head toward Nathan with bright amber eyes full of trust. Nathan smiled and tossed a tennis ball across the room. Ash bounded after it with joyful energy before returning immediately, placing it gently into Nathan's waiting hand. The game continued until evening shadows filled the house, and the fire cast warm golden light across the wooden floor. Outside, the wind whispered softly through the tall pines, carrying away the final traces of winter. Inside, there were no more unanswered questions, no hidden records waiting to be uncovered, and no mysterious identifiers defining who Ash would become. There was only a faithful young German shepherd, a grateful officer, and the quiet understanding that the greatest journeys do not end when the mystery is solved. They begin when someone finally has a place to call home. Years passed quietly in Ashford, Colorado, and the little German shepherd who had once arrived on a rainy road with a mystery surrounding him became a familiar symbol of hope throughout the community. Ash was no longer the tiny puppy Nathan had carried inside his jacket that cold night. He had grown into a strong, graceful German shepherd with a confident posture, bright amber eyes, and the same calm awareness that had made everyone wonder about him from the beginning. Yet despite growing older and stronger, Ash never lost the gentle nature that had first touched Nathan's heart. Every morning, the two followed the same simple routine. Nathan opened the front door of the farmhouse, and Ash stepped outside beside him, breathing in the fresh mountain air before walking slowly across the yard. The old oak tree near the porch had become their favorite place to sit. Some mornings they watched the sunrise in silence. Other mornings Nathan would talk about his day while Ash listened with the patient attention only a loyal dog could give. The mystery that had once surrounded Ash became a story people told not because of what had been hidden, but because of what had been found. A reminder that every life carries value, even when the world fails to notice. Several years after that first rainy night, the Ashford Police Department held a small community gathering to honor local service animals and the people who cared for them. There were no grand speeches or dramatic ceremonies, just families, officers, veterinarians, and neighbors standing together beneath the warm afternoon sun. Nathan arrived with Ash walking proudly beside him, wearing the same simple collar that carried his name. Emily Harper stood among the guests, smiling as she watched the dog she had once examined on a cold clinic table greet children and families with gentle patience. Detective Laura Bennett also attended, carrying a framed photograph from the night Ash was found. It showed a young puppy sitting beside Nathan's patrol cruiser, looking small but determined beneath the rain. Nathan accepted the frame quietly and studied the image for a long moment. He remembered the uncertainty of that night, the questions, the hidden records, the strange identifier that led everyone down a path they never expected to follow. But now, standing in a field surrounded by people who cared about him, Ash represented something far greater than a mystery solved. He represented a second chance. As the sun began to lower behind the mountains, Nathan sat on the grass, while Ash rested beside him. The German shepherd placed his head gently against Nathan's knee, the same way he had done during their first days together. Time had changed many things. The puppy had become an adult. The unanswered questions had become memories. The lonely road near the old train depot had become only a distant chapter in a much larger story. Nathan looked toward the horizon and smiled softly. Some discoveries are not about finding what was lost. They are about realizing what was waiting to be found all along. A small puppy on a forgotten road had brought strangers together, uncovered a forgotten legacy, and reminded an entire community that kindness can reveal truths no record ever could. And in the quiet moments that followed, with the evening breeze moving through the grass and Ash peacefully resting beside him, Nathan understood something simple. The greatest mysteries are not always solved by searching for answers. Sometimes, they are solved by opening your heart when something needs you most.